When we begin to talk about what we typically view genes as doing, and when we extend this to perhaps behaviors, the thing I wonder is how far can we extend it, and where do you draw a line? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about, the God gene and things like this. If we are our genes and they're dictating behavior, is it a stretch too far to suggest that the type of thinking that leads to religious thinking is also in our makeup, and how do you escape that?
Yes, it might be a stretch too far. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think it's probably true to say that religiosity is influenced by genetics, and the kind of way you would test a claim of that kind would be perhaps to look at twin studies, to compare monozygotic, that's identical twins, with dizygotic ordinary twins. And if the characteristic you're interested in this case religiosity, is more likely to be shared by identical twins than fraternal twins, even if the identical twins are reared apart, which they sometimes are for accidental reasons, then we have evidence of genetic influence on variation. And there is some influence, not surprising. I mean, genes influence just about everything else, so there's no reason why they shouldn't influence religiosity. To be interesting in a Darwinian way, you would need to show that the genes engineer their survival by increasing the religiosity of the body in which they sit. Maybe they do, but that might be a bit of a stretch.
There are people who call the show frequently. I'd love to ask you why people call to ask me questions about science, but we know that the most common answer that I've given when people are calling into the show to ask, hey, this disproves evolution, and I ask them, why the hell are you calling me, a non-scientist on a public access show? Why aren't you out seeking your Nobel Prize and publishing to get,
That's a good point, yes.
I think it speaks volumes about their hypothesis, if it could even be called that they are calling to present it to me. But one of the questions that I got, which I have my thoughts on an answer, but as somebody who's not as versed in the science, I'm probably wrong. Have human beings trumped evolution? Or have we escaped natural selection? Have we, and I know I despise this idea of advancing so far to a point, but are we at a point where we control our own fates and natural selection is just out the window for us?
If we have, then that has nothing whatever to do with this disproving evolution. I mean, that's the important point to make. If that's what they're trying to say, then it just simply is illogical. There's no connection whatever. It is an interesting question. It does appear that we have largely removed ourselves from at least the cutting edge of natural selection. As far as survival is concerned, natural selection matters if it kills you before you have time to reproduce.
Right.
And in our civilization, it's rather hard to die young. And so most people reach the age when they could reproduce. So we're no longer being selected for fleetness of foot, keenness of mind, keenness of sight, that kind of thing. Because with handicaps in any of those fields, you can still survive long enough to reproduce. So probably, if there is any natural selection going on in an interesting way, of course there is natural selection against diseases and things like that, but if the sort of interesting natural selection is going on, it's probably with respect to reproduction rather than survival. Not everybody has the same number of children. Some people have lots of children, some people have none. If there is genetic variation in the desire to have children, then that would by definition be natural selection in favor of something. Well, I don't know whether there is, but as I said before, there's genetic variation in most other things, so it would be a little bit surprising if there wasn't a genetic influence, a statistical genetic influence on the inclination to have children. Or it could be a statistical effect on incompetence in using contraceptives.
Oh, the Catholics are going to come after you for that one, because it's not incompetence. You're just not allowed to do that.
Actually, let me tell you a story about that. It's not, well, it's kind of about that. I was doing a television program, and I was sent out to to Kenya, to Nairobi, to the slums of Nairobi, to interview a prostitute, because there is evidence in Kenya of a genetic resistance to AIDS. And there are some prostitutes in Nairobi who are massively exposed to HIV, but who don't get AIDS. And this woman was one such. And she's being researched by actually a Canadian team of geneticists. So I was sent to interview her, and I said, how long have you been a prostitute? And she told me 20 years or 25 years, something like that. And I said, what's happened to all your friends who joined at the same, who did start at the same time? They're all dead, she said, of AIDS. So I said, well, why do you think you're not dead? And she said, well, God must be looking after me. So then I said, well, then why didn't God look after all your friends? And she said, well, I can't understand that, but I tell you this, she said, God loves condoms.